Welcome to Resilient Burlington, where community leaders share their visions for Vermont. With us today is Jesse Bridges, CEO of United Way of Northwest Vermont. What would you like to get the word out about?
I think the biggest thing that we're making sure that people are understanding right now is, the amount of work that we need to do as a community, around a number of different realities that we have here in our community. One of those things is that we're all in this together because I think as a nation, we're all facing many of the same problems. Obviously, the health concern and the situation of COVID-19 and the impact that that's had on the health of our community. The economic realities of what's happened with the economy coming out of COVID and the need to stay healthy and the real pressures that that's putting on really every sector, whether it's local government, business, and the nonprofit sector and philanthropy. I think real issues around the systems and the equity and justice, particularly the racial equity and justice, the work that we all need to do as we move forward. COVID has really laid bare a lot of the inequities in our systems, the way it has disproportionately impacted people, but it's done in a way that's across the country. So I think it's been really evident. And so we're hoping that the community is aware of these real challenges. And the only way that we're going to move through this is if we do this together and do it united.
So how has the pandemic affected your operations?
Well, United Way, we were fortunate to be able to, when our governor issued a stay home, stay safe order, our organization was able to pivot very quickly, thanks to the year-round philanthropy of thousands of donors across our region that enable us to do our work. We were able to transition very quickly to support volunteer mobilization efforts. We were able to raise some additional dollars to support the immediate response, the urgent needs around food and housing and shelter and communication that needed to happen. So we were very fortunate in that kind of initial time period, we were able to do that. I think the biggest thing for us as we move forward is obviously the lack of being able to get people together. One of the big things that we do at United Way is bring business and government and the nonprofit sector and community members together. We have to do that through Zoom and other platforms. And so that's been a big change. We are also seeing a significant decline in philanthropy. So while we had an initial response and were able to raise some additional dollars to respond to direct needs, our ongoing grant making and operations are severely impacted by the economic and health crisis.
What do you see going forward? How can you get resources to the community and get the funds to do so?
Yeah, I think for many of us, everybody's been impacted in some way, but I think the thing for people to recognize, right, is that the impacts are multiplied, particularly if you are in a, generally lower economic situation, lower paying job, or if you have, any sort of other system issue against you, and particularly for people of color, a lot of new Americans in Burlington that have difficulties with the language or other aspects that we're trying to help them with. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done for people to understand that, each of us doing a little bit more or giving of ourselves where we can, particularly philanthropy financially, is going to be incredibly important. It's a necessary part of how we're going to change our systems so that things are more equitable as we move forward. We know that philanthropy plays a huge role in that. We don't think it's going to be big enough to sustain whole programs or efforts, and so we're really going to have an all-in approach. But we do need people to continue to contribute, and I think that that's particularly for their neighbors that aren't employed or those that were already living on the edge. This is for throwing people further into crisis, and our systems in many ways have responded really well to kind of emergent need, but that's not a way to live going forward. Shelters and food shelves are important safety nets, but they're not an equitable way to distribute food or housing. And those are the things with which we need to work to change, and we need the resources to do that.
What are different equitable ways to address those needs?
I think a number of the things that we've been focused on is housing first as a priority for how we deal with our housing crisis. That requires a real all of the above approach where you've got to have housing at all the different income levels. You need to have permanently affordable housing. You need to have support services for people that need additional care, mental health care or other access. You need housing built in places where it makes it easy to access grocery stores, and other community assets so that you have a better ease of transportation. We don't have a very big, robust public transportation program in rural Vermont. And so having the ability to house people, with that being the idea that we work to get people housed, not that we work to just shelter them, is something that where we really want to work. And the charitable food system is not, something that is sustainable in the long term. There's a lot of redundancies. There's a lot of right now just great work that's happening in terms of people donating food. There's lots of food. The distribution systems are all messed up though, right? And we've got to figure out how to recalculate that so that people can get food where, really where everybody else gets food. So a much more equitable way to distribute food benefits or food access is through programs like SNAP or EBT programs, depending on where you're living, than to rely on pop-up volunteer, donation-based food shelves. Those do work in an emergency, like we saw with the initial shutdown, but long-term, it's not a sustainable strategy, and it's not equitable access for people to get food.
Are you doing advocacy work on the state level or even federal level around those issues?
So United Way, we're fortunate as part of United Way Network. We're a small independent United Way. All United Ways are independent organizations run by their local communities and supported by local dollars. But we have a network across the state and across the country that does advocacy at a number of different levels. We're fortunate in Vermont, our legislators, federal legislators, kind of get those systems change pieces. They understand a lot of that work. It's not a ton of convincing there. And there's only 3 of them, so it's a little easier to get the message. So I think that there's a little bit of that that advocacy that's happening at the federal level. At the state level, the reality right now is that everybody's pinched for resources, and the states no exclusion. The federal, there's only so much. We already have big shortfalls at federal and local budgets. But looking at prioritizing and advocating for how we prioritize the resources that we do have. Where is the most efficient way that a sustainable source of revenue, like taxes or other resources that governments have, where should those be invested to prop up a system that then can support itself in other ways, and then use philanthropy to leverage that or leverage improvement or innovation? I often think philanthropy could be the R&D, the research and development of the social service sector, just like venture capital. Or other capital assets are in the for-profit enterprises. That's what we need in the social service sector to get better, to continue to improve and innovate. So I think we're trying to send that message. Our United Way, and many have played a really neutral role for a long time. It's how we've convened tables. We sit at that intersection of government, nonprofit, and the business sector. And because we're neutral, we're able to hold a table and have a conversation. I think we're also challenging the idea that in that neutrality, there's some complicity in allowing systems to continue that are unjust.
How have you seen people in the community step up in this challenging time?
I think we've seen everything from people giving dollars to community efforts, people changing jobs, like within their own organization or shifting organizations in order to do something that they feel like is giving back to the community. Our Meals on Wheels program, our Age Welder program that runs that, lost about 100 volunteers right at the start of the stay-home order because they were older and they couldn't, for safety reasons, couldn't get out and do meal deliveries. We helped AgeWell, a number in the city and Burlington and others helped AgeWell get the word out about volunteers. We recruited 300 new volunteer drivers to get meals delivered to people in need throughout the community. So there's just been an incredible amount of, I think, again, because it's, this is something where we're all, sitting in our homes impacted by this in a lot of ways. We understand that those that are isolated, those without means, those that are subject to systems that didn't work for them in normal times have had it, just quadrupled on them. And so they needed to step up and get out there as best they could. I think it's been frustrating. We had hundreds and hundreds of people sign up to volunteer. but there's also a lot of limitations on volunteer activities. You can't have volunteers just coming into the food shelves to distribute food. You can't have people touching everything. You can't have the close proximity. You need to have trained people in order to kind of move things through a process. So that's been, I think, frustrating for our community, but they found other ways to stay involved and stay connected. Making phone calls to older adults, mentoring programs have all gone digital. There's just a lot of innovation and turning really on a dime when you consider that we've never seen anything like this. That's been really heartwarming to see. And I know, we've got a long road to recovery. It's going to be a while, and I'm hoping people can stay with it and stay in it. And I'm optimistic that our community cares that much about their neighbors that they will.
Where should people go who need resources or who want to volunteer?
I always say, UnitedWay, nwvt.org is our website. We have a number of resources that are listed there. Our volunteer connection portal is a great way to say you want to volunteer and to see different volunteer opportunities that exist. So organizations that do have the opportunities can post them there. We've also created some volunteering guidelines to just keep everybody healthy and safe, and did those in consultation with our partners, and they follow CDC and state guidelines. So those are great. That's a great place to go for that type of resources. Also, if you want to give to larger community efforts, so if you want to make a donation in order to help further our work of systems change and supporting working Vermonters through resource coordination, or the grants that we give to programs throughout our community to help them do their work. We're at the pulse of what's needed. And so supporting United Way gives you that ability to kind of really get your dollars where they're needed most without having to figure it all out yourself. And I think the other place that we really want people to be aware of, if they need access to resources, 211 is the number to call, or 211, Vermont211.org is the place to go for information on what resources are available to you. So if you need help with unemployment insurance or rental assistance, those type of things, that's the resource. That's the statewide resource. And pretty much every state has a 211, and that is a program of United Ways across the state.
How did you get started in this work?
I came to Vermont to go to college, somehow found my way into fundraising at the university, went on to work for the city of Burlington as their director of Parks and Recreation, found a true love there for social impact work and bettering the community at a really local level. United Way had an opening a few years ago. It's just a wonderful, well-respected organization that's been around for decades. It's evolved over time, with the community. It's continuing to evolve and change and be there as a different organization in the future. And I love the idea that we can make some change around social impact. And I think United Way works in a very different place than my city work was a lot more of space making and creating the spaces for that and creating programs for that, where United Way is much more systems change and connecting people to those resources. And I think it's important work to do. And I'm pretty lucky because I just have some exceptional colleagues and community partners to do that work with.
How have you seen United Way and nonprofits and social work change over the years? Here
in Vermont, we've had, a lot of nonprofits have been around for a number of decades with some really consistent, energetic leadership over those decades. Over the last number of years, there's been a lot of leadership change. So in the last 3 to 5 years, there's been a lot of turnover in the nonprofit leadership space, which has created some new thinking about how we can partner and what work we can do together. Thinking about the nonprofit sector as a sector of the economy and how it plays a critical role connecting and keeping resources for many of our most needy, neighbors, but also for all of us. If we increase equity or do the justice work, it's benefit to us all. It's not just a benefit to one person, kind of a universally accessible community. And I take that term from playground design in my Parks and Rec days. You make it so that every kid has a chance to get to the top of the hill. They might not all take the same path, but there is a path for everyone. It doesn't take away from somebody else's experience or ability to get to the top of that hill. And I think we can do that with our systems and our social work. And so I think it's really important that we continue to evolve. We continue to evolve as a sector. We continue to be an important key piece to the economy in the state. and supporting people to do that work is equally important. One of the other things is that our community is hopefully changing in terms of how we view roles in social service and human service, and valuing those as real parts of what make our community great.
I like that metaphor of making sure there's a path for everybody to get to the top of the hill. What do you think are the biggest challenges or opportunities in Vermont?
I think some of our biggest challenges are also some of our biggest opportunities. So we're small, right? We haven't grown in population in a long time. We've had a real loss. There's been a segment of the population that we just age-wise have missed. Many of my colleagues from college, leave the state and go to other places, or for certain parts of their career, and then maybe come back, maybe they don't. So we've just had a real population issue. On the flip side of that, it gives us the ability to be a little bit more nimble. We don't have as many people, and so we can do things, we can experiment with things, we can try things and be an incubator for new ideas, because the scale is workable. Flip side of that means we have less resources though, right? So there's less tax dollars, there's less philanthropy overall compared to a much larger population base. We're aging, so we have 1 in 3 Vermonters will be over the age of 60 by 2030. So it's a big aging population, and transportation is a big issue. The access to transportation and how people get to their community centers, how people get to the food access, how they get to work are big pieces that are part of what we're dealing with. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, one of the big issues we were having was not we weren't having a jobs issue, right? We had jobs, plenty of jobs. We didn't have people. We didn't have a workforce. Our unemployment rate was historically low, and we were missing opportunities to grow companies and nonprofits and other sectors because of the lack of people, in that working age bracket. And so that workforce challenge, I think, remains. We're just dealing with it now with, 15% unemployment. And we'll see where that settles, but it's going to be, I think that's going to be one of the other pivots and challenges of, it's a new problem now in terms of how do you sustain business and grow the workforce at the same time.
Why do you live in Vermont? What makes Burlington special to you?
I came here in 98. I was born in Vermont, but grew up down in Massachusetts, actually, in the North Shore. Came here because of, the access to all the classic reasons people come to school here. And then I think people stay here is they, access to the outdoors, a neighborhood and a community on a bigger sense, on a, more of a, not just your street, but your larger community that has values and opportunities that are in line with what I hope for, want to see going forward. It's a beautiful place, and it's crazy because it can get up to 100 degrees and it can be negative 20, but 4 seasons aren't a bad thing. I was lucky. I mentioned the workforce challenge, the jobs challenge. I was fortunate that I was able to grow my career here and stay. That's not true for everybody. And so I think that's, some of the work ahead is to make that possible for everybody. But I love that you can walk, to water, or you can, kind of travel into the woods. It doesn't take you. You can be in a bunch of different places very quickly. That's not a bad thing.
Who in Vermont inspires you?
I'd say, I'd been inspired by my predecessor. Martha Maxim ran United Way. She worked at the organization, and her predecessor too. I've been fortunate to take over for 2 incredible leaders that, did this work for a long time. Certainly in a very different environment, both economically and socially, but they did an incredible job creating an organization that does focus on impact. And so being able to kind of follow in their footsteps and learn from what they've done and how they've approached that work has been really rewarding. There are a number, I think, of other people in the community that do this work. They think innovatively, but they try new things. You talk to somebody like Kyle Dodson at the YMCA. You think of the Y and you think of swim and gym and basketball, and they're the largest childcare provider in the state. Just incredible what they're able to accomplish. I think of the team over at Champlain Housing Trust. Michael Monty is somebody I've worked with, and look at what he's accomplished. He was the director of CEDO for the city for a number of years, Community Economic Development Office, and then has gone on to provide affordable housing and create all these really innovative ways to provide housing for people throughout our community at a lot of different levels. And I think that's, you look at that type of community building and the legacy that is for people. Those are really inspiring things to see and want to be a part of.
Is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to say a few words about?
My hope is that the community is, understanding more what the time is right now for us to not go back to what was. The idea shouldn't be that we want to just get back to normal, because normal wasn't equitable and just for everyone. It wasn't a great system in a lot of places. And we may looked at that and say, oh, things were so much better. Well, they were for some people. And I think that's the hope, is that we understand all of our work, or whether it's our individuals, our organizations, or our community, the work we have ahead of us is to create a more equitable and just community. And doing that through, there's lots of paths to take. I've seen, we've done a lot of learning about these things, right? And people talk about there's a lot of different lanes to get in terms of how you can be a part of the work. And I think it's just up for people to pick one and get in the game and be part of what's happening. And whether that be volunteering, doing your own learning, advocating and speaking up for people, giving of your dollars or your time, those are all really important things for people to lean into in a time where, if everybody just goes at their own, it's going to be a real long road.
You're listening to Resilient Burlington, where community leaders share their visions for Vermont. With us today is Jesse Bridges, CEO of the United Way of Northwest Vermont. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.